Hello, I'm Esther Githu. It's Monday, April 3rd. This is Africa 54. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris wrapped up her three-nation week-long Africa trip in Zambia, where she held talks with business leaders and various stakeholders. We'll have a report from Lusaka. Kenyan opposition leader Raila Odinga suspends anti-government protests and says he is ready for talks after an appeal from President William Ruto, but warns demonstrations will resume if talks don't bear fruit. And former U.S. President Donald Trump is ready for his legal battle in a hush money case as he prepares to go to court Tuesday for his expected arraignment. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris is back in America after wrapping up her three-nation week-long Africa trip in Zambia, where she held a number of engagements with business leaders and various stakeholders. Daniel Tonga reports from Lusaka.
During her visit to Zambia, Kamala held talks with Zambia's President Hakainde Hichilema, which focused on promoting bilateral relations and Zambia's call for meaningful debt restructuring. Her visit left some Zambians hopeful.
In our efforts to attract foreign investment, we are looking at really partnerships, as opposed to previous systems where foreigners came and took your resources and owned everything. Now Zambia is on a quest, and our president has made very stringent remarks and positions on that point, that we're looking for foreign investment, that we engage in partnership with Zambia in order to develop this country.
The coming of the U.S. Vice President will bring a lot of economic and business opportunities to the country. As you know, we are suffering a crisis. We have an economic crisis. The commodities in our country are very high. And we know that the coming of the Vice President of the United States of America will help this country grow.
Kamala had various engagements before leaving Zambia. At her last meeting with business leaders, she indicated that U.S. commitment to Zambia would help support climate change resilience, adaptation and mitigation.
Here in Lusaka, I announced more than $7 billion in private sector commitments that will support climate resilience, adaptation and mitigation.
Despite America's financial commitments to Zambia, there are those who feel America's aid should not be tied to any conditions.
We as a country have benefited a great deal from America through various programs that they have partnered with this country. We have no quarrels with that and we appreciate that. But this time around, we are also aware that America is attaching conditions to the aid and the support that they want to give us. And this is where we want to deviate from that type of relationship.
Zambia remains a sovereign state, and the people of Zambia, through the constitution, have vowed to defend the constitution and to defend its sovereignty. And that other countries that we are relating with, even those that may offer us aid, should learn to respect our sovereignty.
Kamala's visit to Zambia did not end without some raising concerns over America's foreign policy to Africa. Some residents felt the U.S. Vice President's visit should have addressed issues of promoting Zambia and the U.S. as equal partners.
We believe that the American policy should change. It should be treating the Zambian people or any African country as equals whenever they are trying to build a partnership. The way the Russians do partnerships, the way the Chinese do partnerships with African countries, that's the way to go. Where there is mutual development, mutual understanding and mutual respect.
Analysts say Kamala Harris' visit to Zambia has played a significant role in placing the U.S. as the more reliable partner in helping promote Zambia's development and growth. Daniel Tonga, VOA News, Lusaka.
South Sudanese forces have joined other regional troops in the Democratic Republic of Congo's North Kivu province in an effort to expel the M23 rebels. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
South Sudan troops have linked up with regional forces in North Kivu province in the Democratic Republic of Congo to assist in repelling an M23 rebellion. M23 has caused a lot of suffering, death, and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. The East African Community Regional Force also includes troops from Kenya, Burundi, and Uganda. Since re-emerging from dormancy in late 2021, M23 rebels have captured large swaths of territory in North Kivu province and advanced within several dozen kilometers of its provincial capital, Goma. However, the EAC force commander, Kenyan General Jeff Nyaga, told reporters last week that the planned withdrawal of the rebels is set.
Askari wa East Africa Regional Force kutoka nchi ya Uganda.
Ugandan soldiers from the East African Regional Force will enter Bunagana and deploy to Kiwanja, and this is part of the schedule that has been decided.
Ni kuhakikisha kwamba kuna ulinzi wa wananchi wetu.
We have agreed that their first mission is to ensure the security of our population, and we ask all humanitarian organizations to be able to deploy in all areas to help with this population.
Kuwasaidia wananchi wetu.
The M23 insurgents and several other armed groups continue to attack civilians. Independent United Nations experts and Western nations have accused Rwanda of backing the M23 rebellion, but Rwanda denies those allegations. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington. A panel of United Nations rights experts in a new report are naming several high-ranking South Sudanese officials they say warrant criminal investigation and prosecution for their part in atrocities against civilians. The report identifies Joseph Monyitwil, governor of Unity State, and Lieutenant General Thoi Chane Riat of the South Sudan People's Defense Forces in relation to state-sanctioned killings in Mayom County in August 2022. The commission conducted a year-long investigation across 6 states in South Sudan and says none of those named in the final report had faced any accountability for their crimes. For more insight into this report, I'm joined from here in Washington by Brian Adeba, Deputy Director of Policy at the Sentry, an organization that investigates corruption and human rights violations in Africa. Brian, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
Now, Brian, what more do we know about these officials implicated in these atrocities?
Well, one is the governor of the region or state where the atrocities took place. He's a very close ally of the president in that region, and he's Joseph Monyitwil. And the other one, Tonchiat, is an assistant deputy director of operations for the South Sudanese Army. And he was present allegedly or masterminded or was in control when the atrocities that are outlined in the report were being committed.
Brian, given their high-ranking officials, what are the prospects of them being, taken to court or held accountable?
Well, there have been processes set in place the president commissioned a report to look into the atrocities. However, in South Sudan, when a commission like that is set in place, the prospects that it will come to light have always been very dim. Previous experience shows that these reports are never made public, and this particular one has not been made public. And then it dims the prospects of holding these people accountable, and they are free to do what they are doing, and they've been doing what they're doing without any consequences. So the prospects are dim.
What do we know of the status of the victims of these atrocities, and how can they get justice?
Well, the victims, the dead, 4 of them have been killed. However, what we know and reading from the UN reports is that the relatives of the victims are facing persecution and are afraid and are silent, and they are at risk of being arrested if they speak out about it. Some have gone into hiding.
Brian, I am curious. We just had this report where South Sudan has sent forces to quell crisis and expel M23 rebels in DRC. Do they really? I mean, it's a very controversial thing when you have atrocities being committed right in South Sudan, and now we have forces coming out of that country to quell another crisis in Central Africa.
Well, yes, it might sound like a paradox, but South Sudan as a nation has a responsibility to ensuring global peace and security. And there are numerous studies out there that show that when countries like South Sudan participate in peacekeeping operations, there is a rub-off effect that is positive. First, it will incentivize the adoption of good practices for the military, things like respect for human rights and civilian authority. So there's some dividends there. Of course, the issue here is, of course, South Sudan is burning, and instead of using these troops to quell the fire at home, they're being sent abroad, and that raises a lot of questions in the minds of people. But I guess I think if you look at the larger picture, in my opinion, there is a positive thing that may accrue out of this.
So, Brian, has President Salva Kiir reacted to this report so far, or any of the officials in South Sudan, as far as you know?
Typically, the response of the government to reports that expose wrongdoing within the government is to thrash the report, downplay its findings, and or keep silent. So far, we haven't heard any response to the report. There might be one forthcoming in the next few days, but I expect that the response will not be any different from what we've experienced or seen earlier.
Brian, thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you.
Brian Adeba is Deputy Director of Policy at the Sentry, an organization that investigates corruption and human rights violations in Africa. Kenyan opposition leader Raila Odinga suspended Monday's anti-government protests and is ready for talks after an appeal from President William Ruto. Odinga, however, warned that demonstrations could restart in days. Thousands have joined 3 marches over the past 2 weeks against the high cost of living and alleged fraud in last year's vote. All demonstrations have been marred by violence, and a 4th rally was scheduled for Monday. On Sunday, President Ruto asked Odinga to call off the protest that he says had resulted in 3 deaths and injured more than 400 people, including at least 60 security officers. Both Ruto and Odinga spoke about the demonstrations.
I urge my brother Raila Odinga and the opposition to call off the demonstrations and to give this bipartisan approach a chance for us to take the country forward.
We have met and listened to a diverse group of Kenyans, including religious leaders from all faiths, about the crisis facing our country today. They have implored us to give dialogue, especially during these holy periods of Easter and Ramadan. It is in this context that we make this counter-offer to Hon. Ruto's call for dialogue.
In addition to the protests over the high cost of living, the opposition has been pushing for reforms to the Electoral Commission, including stronger assurances that the president can't pack the body with supporters. Meanwhile, the government of William Ruto has scrapped subsidies on fuel, maize and electricity. The lawyer for former U.S. President Donald Trump says he is ready for his legal battle in a hush money case. Trump is preparing to appear in court Tuesday for his expected arraignment. VOA's Veronica Balderas Iglesias explores how the legal process could unfold.
Former President Donald Trump's lawyer, Joe Tacopina, discussed his intentions when asked on ABC how the former leader, who was indicted late last week, is feeling about the coming arraignment process.
What I hope is that we get in and out of there as quickly as possible, that it's, at the end of the day, a typical arraignment where we stand before the judge, we say not guilty, we set schedules to file motions and whatnot or discovery, and we move forward.
The charges remain sealed, but legal experts say they could center on alleged falsification of business records, revolving around a settlement agreement with porn star Stormy Daniels. Tacopina says he thinks the legal case is weak and politically motivated, but doesn't share Trump's concerns about the presiding judge not being impartial.
Do I think the judge is biased? Of course not. How could I subscribe to that when I've had no interactions with the judge that would lead me to believe he's biased?
The former president has also voiced strong criticism of prosecutor Alvin Bragg, who filed the indictment. That could backfire, said former Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr. when interviewed on NBC's Meet the Press.
Interfering with or by threat or otherwise the operation of government. When you add a count like that, put it in front of a jury, it can change the jury's mind about the severity of the case that they're looking at.
But it is unlikely that a judge forces Trump to not talk in public about current and other criminal investigations he faces, said his lawyer in the classified documents case, Jim Trusty, on Fox News.
I think it would be very difficult for a judge to impose a gag order on a person running for president. You talk about having a profound effect on this country.
Trump's lawyers said the Secret Service will be involved as part of the tight security in and around the courthouse Tuesday, when the former president is expected to be fingerprinted and photographed before being read the exact charges he faces. Trump's office says he is expected to deliver remarks at his Mar-a-Lago estate Tuesday night. The development comes as Trump campaigns ahead of the 2024 presidential election. Veronica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
For more on former President Donald Trump's arraignment, VOA correspondent Tina Trinh joins me from New York. Hello, Tina.
Hi, Esther.
Now, this is a very high-profile case. We haven't seen this in years, I think, maybe never. But describe the security situation around New York, where former President Trump is going to be arraigned tomorrow.
Well, right now, tight security, as it has been for the past couple of weeks. Large police presence on the streets. Every surrounding block around the courthouse has police presence, lots of police vehicles, plenty of those metal barricades that you see directing pedestrian traffic. So it's very tight security around here as we wait in anticipation for tomorrow's events.
Give us a sense of what you're gathering from New York on what we should expect to see tomorrow.
Yeah, so a lot of media presence happening right now and just kind of a wait and see game. Tomorrow there is a rally planned in support of Trump in the morning in this very park that I'm standing in. And so that is being held by the New York Young Republican Club. And there is expected to be congressional appearance representation by Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who will be in attendance tomorrow morning as well. That rally is planned for 10:30 a.m. tomorrow, which technically would happen before Trump is scheduled to go in. We don't know the exact time. It is supposed to be sometime in the afternoon. So perhaps a chance here that Trump would actually stop by the rally.
Tina, Donald Trump is a former New Yorker. Tell us how New Yorkers feel about his indictment.
You know, it's funny, if you followed his career at all, he is a Queens boy from New York City and really has fashioned himself to be a real estate and business mogul in New York City. You know, a lot of New Yorkers kind of saw through this braggadocio, this showman, a lot of bluster on his part. He was fodder for the tabloid scene in New York City. And so many New Yorkers would probably say that there's very little love lost here. You're talking about a cross-section of New Yorkers who were reporting for jury duty and decided to go ahead and move forward with an indictment of a former New Yorker.
And briefly, Tina, what happens next after he is arraigned?
After he's arraigned, his defense team will examine the charges, and it will take some time before this case goes to trial, if it goes to trial. If we think about precedent, the last time the Manhattan District Attorney Office indicted the Trump Organization and CFO Alan Weisselberg was convicted, the time between that indictment and the case actually going to trial was 16 months. So we're in for the long haul here.
Tina, we look forward to having you again tomorrow to see how things unfold in New York. Thank you very much for your reporting.
Thank you.
VOA's Tina Trin reporting live for us from New York. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, finding relatives who are unable to escape the Tigray conflict. Stay with us. You're watching Africa 54, coming to you live from the Voice of America studios here in Washington, D.C. In other news, Burkina Faso's military-led government has expelled 2 French journalists working for newspapers Le Monde and Liberation, according to 2 publications. The newspapers are accusing Burkinabe authorities of seeking to stifle freedom of speech with an escalating crackdown on foreign media. Britain's Interior Minister, Suella Braverman, says she is convinced Rwanda is a safe country to resettle migrants who arrived in Britain illegally. Britain hopes to send thousands of migrants more than 4,000 miles away to Rwanda as part of a $148 million deal to deter asylum seekers crossing the English Channel from France. And falling local currency, salary arrears, payments, and war spending are pushing up prices in impoverished Democratic Republic of Congo, leaving locals struggling to afford basics. Since January 1st, the DRC franc has depreciated about 15% against the US dollar, hitting the poorest the hardest. As Ethiopia's civil war comes to an end, along with a communications blackout in the Tigray region, the Red Cross is helping refugee families who fled to Sudan find their relatives who are unable to escape the conflict. Henry Wilkins met in Khartoum with one man who is desperately looking for his lost relative.
In Khartoum, a long-established community of expatriates from Ethiopia's Tigray region is seeing new arrivals. Refugees who fled the 2-year-long war in Tigray. Even though it ended with a peace agreement in November, some still trickle in from the refugee camps close to Ethiopia's border. Getachew is one of them. VOA is not using his real name to protect him and his family. Now that phone and internet service has been restored in Tigray, many like Getachew are searching for missing relatives they were separated from in the war. Getachew has not seen his father, a soldier in the Tigrayan army, since the war began.
He was in the military. He was a soldier. But we don't have any information on whether he is alive or dead. Even my family can't find my father. I don't have anyone to ask.
Specialists from the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, are helping people like Getachew find their families.
If they lost contact with their loved ones, then we provide them tracing service, both receiving from abroad and sending from here.
ICRC is one of the humanitarian organisations which is allowed to operate in Tigray. Both sides in Ethiopia's conflict have been accused of crimes against humanity, but the extent of the ethnic cleansing which is alleged to have taken place in Tigray is not yet known. Journalists and human rights investigators have not been given access to the region by Ethiopian authorities. VOA asked if the ICRC's tracing service can provide any insights into the scale of the atrocities in Tigray.
Now, I don't have specific statistics with regard to this context here, but we have thousands of people who are looked for by a family member, and we have dozens of resolved cases. Of course, the cases resolved will increase.
Katad says most cases take a long time to solve, if they're solved at all. But Getachew continues his search with the help of Shardin.
I called my grandparents to ask where my father is, but they don't know anything. Because of the war, I can't find my family and I can't live without them.
His search is unlikely to bear fruit, but he is not giving up. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Khartoum, Sudan.
And that wraps up our show this Monday. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.
We are gravely alarmed over the rise of violence against civilians in South Sudan, where killings of civilians increased by 79%. We remind the transitional government of South Sudan that it has not upheld its primary responsibility to protect the civilians of South Sudan. If the transitional government wishes to achieve a successful transition to a permanent government, then it is imperative that it take responsibility to protect civilians and create a secure and stable electoral environment. We call upon the transitional government to act now to show the political will to create such conditions, including by ensuring that South Sudanese men and women can freely express their political views without fear of arrest. The transitional government reported $1.6 billion in oil revenue last year, yet continues to fail to allocate those resources to address the humanitarian needs of its population. We urgently call on South Sudanese officials to dedicate more of its oil revenue to addressing the crisis. We call on the government to fully support humanitarian access and protect humanitarian aid personnel working tirelessly to deliver aid to South Sudanese people. The United States remains committed to the cause of peace and to the people of South Sudan.